Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Zero to Empire podcast. On this episode, I have Joe Bohringer, and he's the executive coach and advisor, and he actually is quite the story. He spent over 30 years in the Major League Baseball and league, and he has a lot to talk about in this podcast episode. So make sure to stay tuned, watch the entire thing, and just make sure to listen. So, Joe, thanks for being on the podcast. And my first question is, what actually drew you to the place of MLB? And in the first place, and how did that actually evolve into your coaching today?
Thanks, Sam. Well, first of all, I appreciate the invite and hope it's worthwhile for the listeners today. So, good question. I'd always been involved in sports growing up. Played pretty much everything in high school. Ended up going to college. I went to MIT in Boston, and decided that sports were not really going to be in the offing as far as on the field. So, started out as an engineering major, mechanical engineering. They gave me a kind of a widget and said, look at this from 86 different angles. I got to about angle 3 and was like, this is really not for me. So hightailed it over to the business school and ended up getting a business degree from there, but had always loved sports, wanted to get involved in sports. So I was able, while I was still in college, to do some internships with some minor league clubs, which in turn turned into a full-time job coming out when I graduated, and was one of the lucky few that the first career path that I chose was the one that I stuck with the entire time, at least for the first 31 seasons. So really enjoyed the time there, and then had a chance to was fortunate. I was with a lot of really successful groups. I won a World Series ring with the Chicago Cubs, was with multiple playoff teams. And at the end of my career, after 2020 was the COVID year, for those that might remember, and you might remember, sports teams were in the bubble. So I was in a hotel for 4 months, spitting in a tube every 48 hours, hoping I tested negative, and literally sitting in empty stadiums with cardboard cutouts of fans. If you remember, people were like taking pictures, and there were cardboard cutouts of fans in the stands for the televised games. So at the end of that season, just it was the first time the grind of the job kind of outweighed the joy of the game. And so sat down with my family and decided I didn't know what the next stage was going to be, but it was time to maybe end that phase and start something new. But I'd always been involved in the development end of helping develop players, helping develop young scouts, young front office executives. And in turn, I was contacted by an executive coaching firm, and kind of their pitch was that high performers are high performers regardless of environment. And athletes are trying to be high performers with their bodies. Executives are trying to be high performers with their minds or their systems or their programs, whatever it might be. And I found that to be the case. A lot of successful, high achieving players really match up with the successful, high achieving executives, and business at its core is competition. Unless you have a monopoly, business is competition. And I've found that a lot of the same traits and characteristics and routines and processes and the way to maybe frameworks for success apply in both arenas. And was very fortunate to help a lot of players to make that journey, and that has transitioned over well to kind of meeting executives where they are and what they're trying to get to, and then trying to help them take their next step, whatever that might be.
That's solid, and that's quite the journey. And that's really cool. You actually have that insight on the Major League Baseball. And so, how are there any common leadership struggles you see across fast-paced, high-stakes sectors like executives, MLB, et cetera?
I think there is, and I think this is where actually my professional experience helps. I thought it was really interesting when I was first talked to by an executive coaching firm. They had talked about their process in trying to maybe recruit people. They looked for high stakes environments, law enforcement, military, and obviously, elite sports was part of that. And a lot of that is because of a couple of ideas. One was second order effects, and military or law enforcement, like the second order effect could literally be life or death. Like you could get hurt on the job. Sports is not life or death. Sometimes fans think it's life or death. It's not, but you are under such public scrutiny. So you're always thinking about, if we make this decision, what's going to happen. And we could make a roster move at 3:00, and they don't like it at 4:00 on talk radio, and at 5:00, our owner could call us and go, "Hey, we did the right thing at 3:00, right?" And it's like, yeah, that's what you hired us for. But that was one thing, was that idea of second order effects and understanding that as a decision maker. And the other one was just getting so many reps, decision-making reps. Every decision that you take, you're gonna put it out in the world, see what happens. You're gonna get some feedback. You're going to plan, and you're gonna execute again. And in those arenas of law enforcement, military, every shift is a learning environment in law enforcement. Every patrol is in military. For us, every game's a rep, and we play 162 games in 185 days in Major League Baseball. So we have so many more decision making reps under our belts. And what was when I was approached, it was that executives, those are two things, like second order effects and understanding what your decisions might cause, but then also just understanding how to navigate decision-making processes when things speed up. Those were two things that a lot of executives, especially early in their careers, are looking for assistance with. And it's something that those environments that I mentioned, it's very natural and it happens normally. And the default, it's almost like survivor bias. If you're in one of those industries for a long time in a decision-making role, you're going to have above average decision-making skills. Because if I'm a staff sergeant in the military, but I'm not good at it, they allow me to do that for about 2 weeks and they never let me do it anymore. So, because the industry kind of weeds out good decision makers and people who have that ability, that transferred over to coaching. And I did not end up kind of taking that opportunity, but it intrigued me enough. I live outside of Chicago. I volunteered with a nonprofit firm that was working with some executives. I found it very fulfilling in trying to help people take that next step, and went ahead and did the things I needed to do to get the certifications to kind of be able to do that, and have been very fortunate to help both in the sports world and the corporate world, and helping teams and groups and executives, whether they be individuals also, as well, try to take their next step, whatever that is.
That's really cool, and I'm glad to hear it. And that's nice that you're making that change in everything you're doing with your clients. So, how do you actually approach customizing the coaching engagements for each of your clients?
I think it's always working backwards. It should be client driven. It's never our outcome that we're looking for as a coach or advisor. It's always trying to help the client to reach their outcome. So it's always working backwards about, where can we help best? What can we help you with? What are you trying to achieve? And then helping them really draw their roadmap. And whether it be a group or a team or an organization, trying to work backwards from what are you trying to get to? And then really focusing on three things. Like, I think the first thing is really digging into creating awareness around it. What is the challenge or opportunity that you're looking at here? And sometimes on the other side of the challenge is an opportunity. So creating awareness around that challenge or opportunity, and then helping the client come up with what are the right action steps, whether they be resources to go get, training to go get, action steps to take, communication lines or communication to have, or communication lines to open, but helping them figure out what the right action steps are to help them increase their odds of getting to that goal. And then in turn, the last step is really the accountability. Like, how are you going to do it? What are the milestones? Who are you going to partner with? Sometimes it's with the coach or advisor. Sometimes it's finding someone to help you once you start that journey, but really helping them with what is the ideal outcome, and then working backwards through that kind of awareness, action, and accountability to help them come up with the roadmap that makes the most sense to them, to help them, create the best chance for themselves to achieve the goal they're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a really good way to go about the accountability aspect. And what's actually one principle from the pro sports league that applies pretty well, if not perfectly, to business?
You know what? And I'll just say this: it takes what it takes. The standards are the standards. If you want to be an A-ball player and you want to get to AA, you have to meet the AA standards. And if you want to get to AAA, you have to meet the AAA standards. And likewise, at the top, you have to meet the major league standards. And standards never lower themselves to our level of performance. It doesn't work that way. We always have to raise our performance to the level of the standard. And I found that universal trait applies in the business world as well. To increase your revenue, if you're trying to meet that standard, you have to raise your performance to meet that. If you're trying to get your company to the next level of scale, what are the standards you have to meet to do that? If as an executive, from the director level to a VP level, what are the standards that VPs need to meet, and how do you close that gap to make sure that you're meeting those standards? And I think what's really helped me is that a lot of times just using that standards framework, most clients know indirectly the standards that they need to meet, but they don't really articulate it in a way that gives them a framework of what to shoot for. And I think that idea of the standards are what the standards are, and it takes what it takes. That idea has been very helpful in really just talking through it with executives. And I don't say what the standards are. they say what the standards are. And a lot of times, especially in their industries, they have insight into that I can't necessarily provide for them. But I do understand the framework enough to help them work backwards again from identifying what those standards are, and then what do they need to keep doing, what do they need to maybe start doing, and maybe what do they need to stop doing to meet that standard. So helping them to make that journey, coming up with the roadmap and helping them to make that journey. But that idea of the you have to meet the standards to attain the next level of performance, I think that's translated perfectly from the sports world to the business world.
Totally is fair. Standards are very key, especially in any aspect, depending on what you're trying to do. And if you could give one piece of advice to a emerging leader under pressure, what would it be?
I think it's stopping and thinking. We get so caught up on, I'll call it the treadmill, the hamster wheel. You just go. And sometimes we think faster is better. And as a young leader, and it took me a long time to learn, actually sometimes slower is better. Like just step off for a second and look around and ask for help. What's the resource that might be available to you to help? Who's a mentor that might be able to help? Who's a partner that might be able to help? And if you have expertise in an area, but you're only conversant in another area, and the problem's something that you're only conversant in, how do you access expertise somewhere else to help you work through that problem? So it seems so simple to just say, stop and think, but it is so hard to do, mostly because of the stop part. When you're moving that fast and things start to speed up, we want to go faster, and it's almost counterintuitive, but sometimes actually slowing ourselves down to be able to take that pause and just take a breath before we, jump back into the fray. Because sometimes taking that breath, what we realize is, oh, that's not actually where I want to try and, attack that problem. I should go attack the problem over here. So, the number one piece of advice I think for people that are doing that is find that way to, whether it be yourself as an individual or your team on a project, like find a way to stop and think, to really recalibrate and make sure that before you run, make sure you're running in the right direction.
That's true. It's always good to just take a moment and look at everything from a outside perspective as well, and just see where you're going is the right route to go. And where can those actually interested in your coaching find and reach out to you by?
I do have a website. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn as well. Obviously the name is there, as most people are, but I do have a website, jbexecutivecoach.com. So just the two initials, JB, and then all one word, executivecoach.com. And it lists, I've done group work, I've done teamwork, I've worked with, executive leadership teams, and I think for me, most people, or I shouldn't say most, but I know a lot of people are dedicated to like a vertical. They coach in healthcare, or they coach in manufacturing or supply chain management. I found that my coaching has been more a tier of leader, more across decision makers, directors, vice presidents, as particularly if they're in faster paced, higher stakes environments. And I think every industry has, their version of that. But I've found that most of the clients that I work with tend to be more at a horizontal decision making level, as opposed to in a specific vertical. But going back to an earlier question, that's where those universal ideas kind of apply, and then helping those executives take that into their vertical, whatever that vertical might be. So again, I can be reached at jbexecutivecoach.com is the easiest way to do it, but I'm also on LinkedIn as well.
Make sure to check out Joe. It was great having you on the podcast, and I'll see everyone in the next episode of Zero to Empire.